Now to a promise of action and change following a nearly year-long CBS 2 investigation of Chicago police raiding the wrong homes.
Innocent children like this little boy traumatized by guns pointed at them. CBS 2 investigator Dave Savini exposes 2 new cases along with what the mayor and inspector general vow to do.
Did anybody knock?
No.
They just came in?
First, they busted through the doors of his family's apartment, and then came the guns.
They had their finger on a trigger.
A lot of guns. Handguns and assault rifles like these.
So they were pointing the guns at your sisters?
Mm-hmm.
What were you thinking then?
I'm thinking maybe they were going to get shot.
8-year-old J.J. Jackson was playing in his room when Chicago police burst in. His 11-year-old sister, Talia, says guns were in their faces.
I was afraid and confused.
And tonight, a disturbing pattern continues as more families are accusing Chicago police of bad raids.
Chicago police search warrant!
Busting in homes and drawing weapons on innocent families.
How many of you had guns pointed at you?
Including Jolanda Blassingame's family.
And I felt scared for my life.
Her boys were playing video games while she was cooking dinner when she says police threw a flashbang grenade into her home.
How many of you were told to get down on the ground?
Police used the word of an unnamed informant who, according to the complaint for search warrant, said weekly heroin sales were being made by this man at the address where Blassingame and her kids lived.
They had an informant.
Yeah.
That's what they told you?
Yeah.
But we found the man police were looking for didn't even live there.
This is the person police were looking for.
Mm-hmm.
But no one's ever even seen this guy.
Nope. I knew they had the wrong apartment when they looked at each other crazy.
Dave.
Mayor Lori Lightfoot says these wrong raids have to stop immediately.
We can't have this.
And now is reacting to our 10-month CBS 2 investigation, exposing case after case of bad Chicago police raids happening at the homes of innocent people across the city.
Mayor, we've now had dozens of victims of wrong police raids.
Yeah.
Chicago police search warrant!
Police using bad information without properly investigating.
They live upstairs.
Then busting into the wrong homes.
He gave us the wrong apartment.
Wrong homes, wrong targets, and pointing guns at the wrong people, including kids, over and over again.
I thought they were going to shoot him.
Where did they point the gun at you?
I wanted to like right here.
Where did they point the rifle? How were they holding them?
Like this.
So we're going to dig down, look at these specific incidents, see what we can learn from them, and try to, as best we can, not to repeat those kinds of mistakes.
Like when 8-year-old Royal Wilson's family showed us how they were walked out at gunpoint and how the 3rd grader was handcuffed for 30 minutes.
I was just scared. My legs were shaking.
Every one of these incidents is an aggravator and a perpetuator of this mistrust that exists.
Chicago Inspector General Joe Ferguson knows he has a lot of work to do to fix this.
A number of the things that you've brought to us have prompted us to start to look at aspects of this.
One aspect we put a spotlight on is the trauma to innocent kids. The IG has now launched a full-scale investigation into the methods Chicago police are using to obtain and execute search warrants.
They use a bar and they knock it open.
So police did this?
Yes.
Crystal Archie says her son JJ and her daughters now fear the police.
The first raid was probably the worst.
You heard that right. The first raid was the worst.
How many times was your home invaded?
3 times. 3 times.
She says all 3 raids and warrants were for people she never even heard of.
Each time, the warrant was for nobody in your house?
Each time.
The warrants named suspected drug dealers known as Peanut and Lord T.
We don't have names in our home like
Lord
T and
Peanut
at all.
All 3 raids happened during the last 6 months, and while no one in her home was ever arrested, she says they were left with a threat of even more raids to come.
These officers told the children that they would be back.
Every single one of these raid situations is a form of imposition of trauma by the government on citizens of the city.
Relax, guys.
The CBS 2 investigators have been wanting to tell you how often something as traumatic as this actually happens to Chicago families. And we've been battling Chicago police for nearly a year to get records released.
So you raised this issue with me a couple weeks back, and the very next day, I raised it with the superintendent and his leadership team.
But Chicago police top brass don't want you to have that information. So we went to the Illinois Attorney General's office, which forced CPD to release at least a small sliver of data. So what did the police eventually turn over? Only a fraction of search warrant records, full of holes with thousands of warrants missing. CPD gave us information on just 2,708 search warrants since 2016. Yet we've uncovered there were more than 11,000 CPD warrants signed off on by the Cook County State's Attorney's Office during that time frame. So why isn't CPD releasing the other 8,000 plus warrants? They refuse to explain.
You raised the question of FOIA. I'm all about it. I don't want people to have to hire lawyers, sue the city to get access to basic information.
The 2,708 search warrant records CPD did turn over raises yet another question. They showed just 42 arrests. That means more than 98% of the time, no one was arrested.
We have the right and the authority to have access to all the records of the police department.
Chicago's Inspector General says he plans on using his authority to get the records CPD has refused to release to us and to get to the truth.
We should make sure that there is tracking and accountability.
Do you believe we've uncovered troubling information?
You've absolutely uncovered a sufficient number of situations that have resulted in really bad outcomes.
So it was the wrong apartment?
Yeah.
But wait until you hear just how wrong they got it. Remember when we told you about the raid on the Blassingame family and how the target police were looking for didn't even live there?
They didn't investigate right. They didn't do anything right.
We found his name is Derek Bell. And if the police would have checked their own criminal database, they would have discovered what we uncovered in minutes. At the time of the raid, Bell was actually 200 miles away and had been for years, serving time in a downstate prison for murder.
The informant told them that he'd been buying heroin out of the second floor apartment for 2 months from a guy named Ace, Derek Bell.
Then nobody studied but me and my boys.
Again, no arrests were made, and her boys were all traumatized in the process with guns pointed at them.
It's something I won't forget.
What it does when we make mistakes, and particularly when we make mistakes in the way in which we deal with our children, that leaves an indelible scar that is very, very difficult to repair.
What are you thinking right now?
That they may come back.
For 10 months, we've been requesting an interview with Police Superintendent Eddie Johnson. He has refused every request.
Chicago police changing how they conduct search warrants after an 18-month CBS 2 investigation exposed officers repeatedly raiding innocent families' homes.
Yeah, the mom of these children says it's not nearly enough. CBS 2 investigator Dave Savini showed her newly uncovered body camera footage of her bad raid.
It's 8:30 at night.
I see lights.
You're inside a police car on Chicago's South Side.
We're sneaky.
A team of officers zeroes in on a house. 14 heavily armed cops.
Swing up.
On the hunt for a heroin dealer with the street name Peanut.
Door's locked.
Did anybody knock?
No.
Good.
They just came in?
Search warrant, Chicago police! Door's open. Going in. Watch the right.
But they are breaking into the wrong home. And all they find are innocent children.
They had guns to our faces.
14-year-old Savannah in the purple shirt hits the ground. You are looking at the back end of a high-powered rifle.
No! I'm not going to this again!
Shut up.
Lying next to her, still in his school uniform, is her 7-year-old brother, JJ. He was stunned at the sight of an assault rifle.
And they had their finger on a trigger.
Clear in there.
In another room, their 11-year-old sister, Talia, is face down, surrounded by more weapons. Their mother, Crystal Archie, watches for the first time what happened to her children. She was on her way home from work when the raid happened back in April of 2019.
Relax.
Please not shoot me, please.
You're fine. You know who's on the floor right there? Can you tell who's on the floor?
My daughter is on the floor. I can hear her. I can hear her yelling. I can hear her yelling. And you just see the guns at the back of her head.
Her oldest child, Savannah, was babysitting.
Come on, get up. Get up. Get up.
They're handling heavy artillery. It would have taken one slip of your finger, and my children would not be here.
We don't want to see that happen. We don't want to erode the trust with the community.
Now, for the first time, Chicago police are talking about the disturbing trend the CBS 2 investigators exposed, which includes more than 23 children who say police pointed guns at them during wrong raids.
Where did they point the gun at you?
I wanted to like right here, but like straight at it.
Where did they point the rifle?
It was like around.
They pointed a gun at me.
When you saw some of the stories, what did you feel for some of these kids?
Based on the way that the footage was, you felt bad for them.
Chicago Police Lieutenant Matthew Klein and Risk Manager Michelle Morris.
Let's be clear, no child should have a gun pointed in his face.
They say the department is now adding training for officers to deal with children and creating a new search warrant policy aimed at protecting kids from trauma during raids.
How are you going to deal with children?
We're making sure that if we know children to be present, that in our operational planning, that it's discussed that there's going to be children in here.
What good is the plan if the officer, the affiant who's getting the warrant, hasn't independently verified, double-checked and triple-checked the informant's information to make sure you're actually going into the right apartment or the right home?
Are there some that are not being done to the standards that we have? Absolutely, and that's being addressed.
Lieutenant Klein says there will be more oversight of the search warrant approval process, including a requirement mandating all officers run the proper public record checks through their information center at police headquarters to make sure they are raiding the right addresses.
Things fell through the cracks and they didn't realize that that was the proper way to obtain this information.
Repeated failures to get addresses right, leaving behind a trail of trauma.
This is the saddest moment.
And still, the city is refusing to track these wrong raids, covering up just how big the problem really is. The little bit of data the CBS 2 investigators forced the city to release shows since 2016, police executed 6,800 search warrants. In nearly 3,000 cases, not a single arrest was made. We can't tell you how many of those 3,000 were wrong raids because tonight, even with the new policy in place, they admit they still have no method to track these kinds of wrong raids.
Are you creating any kind of a database for that, for those types of raids?
It has not currently been contemplated, but it might be in the future.
And while they still won't track all the wrong raids, there are changes requiring body cameras are rolling from start to finish at every single new raid.
It must be on the entire time.
At what point in the raid are they supposed to turn them off?
When they leave.
Which brings us back to the Archie raid, where we found the raid team cut their body cameras off after only 3 minutes. In fact, police stopped recording right after the cameras captured something happening to the children that's not only outrageous, it might even be illegal.
Hey, just tell us, do you know where the stuff's at? Because if you can tell us that, then we're out of here.
And with no parent present,
Right here. Have a seat. Hold your hands like your sister. No, like this. Hold your hands like this. All three of you.
continue questioning.
Any drugs? You know of any drugs that he sells?
Remember, this is the wrong house, and they never even heard of the guy named in the warrant.
So he stopped selling out of here? He stopped keeping it here? Who? Whoever keeps it here?
We never had it.
The children say the interrogation continued, followed by a search of the home. But there's no body camera video of that because the sergeant in charge gave this order.
If everybody's secure, we can kill cameras.
The kids say when the police left, they told them they would return.
And there was a real fear from the children that they might come back.
Absolutely. I've literally walked into the apartment and I just cried. And there's no way to feel about going home. And that's my life now.
3 weeks after that raid, police raided the family's home again. We can't show you what happened that time because we are told none of those officers used body cameras. It's been 10 months since those raids, and no one from Internal Affairs or the Civilian Office of Police Accountability, the agency that investigates police misconduct, has reached out to interview Crystal Archie or her kids.
The CBS 2 investigators have been exposing Chicago police, breaking down doors, pointing guns at children and parents while raiding homes of innocent families. 51 allegations of wrong raids uncovered so far in the past few years. Now, even more disturbing details from inside houses as body cameras record video, then suddenly stop. Here's CBS 2 investigator Dave Savini. Dave.
Erica, police are required to keep their body cameras rolling during raids from start to finish. But we found a sergeant repeatedly telling his team to kill all body cameras long before the raids were over. And now innocent families who had their homes ransacked want justice.
Get your hands up. There's a baby in here.
Tony Tate had just changed into her nightgown when police suddenly swarmed her apartment.
They just came in with guns drawn.
She feared the officers might mistake the shiny metal object in her hand for something dangerous.
I got a spoon in my hand.
She says she was terrified when she saw guns pointed at her two daughters.
Is anybody else in here?
Her oldest daughter, Sierra, was holding her baby sister.
When he pointed his gun at me, still, I had covered her like this.
On the ground.
Tate's son, Christopher, was ordered to the floor with a rifle to his head.
What's going on? What's going on?
You were worried about him?
Yes. I'm sorry. Yeah.
Body camera footage like this is crucial in understanding what really goes on during these raids.
Bust it. CBD search warrant.
From the very beginning, to their forced entry, to once inside. Critical footage revealing what happens to innocent people as police are once again caught on their own cameras raiding another wrong home. This time they're looking for a suspected drug dealer who never lived here and that the Tates had never heard of.
What's going on?
We were both handcuffed for about almost an hour.
Innocent people handcuffed.
Yes.
Ouch, this hurts. You're right.
But we can't show you everything that happened to her and her family during the entire raid and search that followed, because see this sergeant in the red shirt? That's Sergeant Anthony Bruno. Listen as he gives this order.
Let's go to cameras.
Kill cameras. Kill cameras.
Let's go to cameras.
Bruno gave the kill cameras order after recording only 2.5 minutes of the raid inside the house. What appears to be a complete violation of Chicago Police Department body camera policy.
Kill cameras.
They all kill their cameras except
Sheila Betty, a law professor at Northwestern University, is involved in consent decree negotiations mandating Chicago police reforms related to misconduct and use of excessive force.
Policy could not be more clear. They had to have their cameras on.
Doors open. Go in. Watch the right.
Just 4 months earlier, Bruno and a raid team were caught doing the same exact thing during another wrong raid. You're looking at the back end of a high-powered rifle as 3 innocent children drop to the floor.
Please do not shoot me. Please.
You're fine. You're fine. Come on, get up. Get up. Get up.
After terrifying a 7-year-old, an 11-year-old, and their 14-year-old sister with weapons,
Have a seat. Hold your hands like your sister.
police began interrogating them without a parent present.
Hey, just tell us. Do you know where the stuff's at? Because if you can tell us that, then we're out of here.
The children say this interrogation continued, but you won't see any of that because once again, only minutes into the raid, you can hear Sergeant Bruno again give the same order.
If everybody's secure, we can kill cameras. Okay.
Okay.
Betty also says Bruno's team broke the law when they interrogated the children.
So we stopped selling out of here? We stopped keeping it here?
Who?
Whoever keeps it here?
We never had it.
The only reason, the only justification for cutting off cameras in this kind of a situation is some sort of cover-up, right? Or is some sort of recognition that they made a bad call. They don't need further documentation of it.
Despite all the millions the city spent on equipping thousands of officers with body cameras, Bruno repeatedly gave the kill cameras order before the raids were over, making the body-worn camera policy worthless. Neither Bruno nor his teams were disciplined for either raid.
It's critically important that Chicago police officers who violate policies like the body cam policy are held accountable. Those policies, or else the policies are meaningless. They're not worth the paper they're written on.
Body cameras were supposed to create transparency, uncover misconduct, and build trust with the public. But watch how fast that trust erodes as Tate's husband returns from work and learns about the raid.
What's going on? I just did 2 16-hour shifts, plus I got a second job. Whoever told y'all about we selling drugs or whatever, that's bullshit. Honestly.
Officers tell him a different story about how his family was being treated.
They're all good. They're sitting on their couch. No one's in handcuffs, nothing like that.
Police tell him they're all good and no one's in handcuffs.
Sit there, trade.
That's not what the body cams show.
And I'm going to stand right here and tell them I feel like my sister said.
Tate's brother also showed up and reminded cops that people are fed up with all their wrong raids.
Police always kick in doors with search warrants and they don't even be the crib they looking for, bro. It happens. It happens. Don't.
What do you want to say to the police department?
Just get your information correct before you just come in on innocent families.
Both families are suing CPD. Chicago police say they are now investigating Sergeant Bruno and what happened on these raids. But the attorney for the wrong raid victims, Al Holfeld Jr., says neither family has ever been contacted to be part of any investigation by CPD or the Civilian Office of Police Accountability. 51 wrong raid cases and counting. The tips just keep coming in.
Oh, they certainly do. And so this sergeant, you've been asking questions about him for a while, but this is the first indication that they're investigating.
We've been asking, and not until tonight did they say, or last night did they say that they are finally officially investigating him. So
all right.
Hopefully this goes somewhere and they get to the root of the problem.
Yes, thank you, Dave. It took just 1 month after a new policy for it to happen again. We're talking about wrong raids. This time, Chicago police pointed a gun at a 4-year-old.
And tonight, for the first time, we're breaking down not only how often police execute search warrants, but where. We took our findings and a troubling pattern to new Superintendent David Brown. Here's CBS 2 investigator Dave Savini.
Do you remember what the police did to that door?
They knocked that door off.
They knocked it off?
That thing.
4-year-old Lily was with her grandma, Sharon Lyons, when police busted into their home.
Next thing I know, the whole panel to the side of my door came flying down.
They are the latest victims of a bad Chicago police raid.
For them people to come in my house like that, it ain't did me no good.
It happened in February, just 1 month after CPD sat down with the CBS 2 investigators and made a commitment to put a stop to these wrong raids.
We don't want to see that happen. We don't want to erode the trust with the community.
The commitment to change how police obtain and execute search warrants came nearly 2 years after the CBS 2 investigators started exposing a disturbing pattern of officers raiding the homes of innocent families in Chicago's black and brown neighborhoods. And yet they did it again.
And that's when they had the machine guns and whatever guns them was, they was in my face.
You can still see the damage to Sharon Lyons' door as the raid team was on the hunt for a drug dealer police only knew by the name of Blondie. We'd show you a mugshot of Blondie, but they don't have one. According to the complaint for search warrant, they took the word of a paid informant who said Blondie was selling drugs in the apartment building, but didn't know Blondie's real name and could only describe Blondie as a black transgender woman about 5'9" with a blonde wig. And then, without independently verifying who Blondie really was, broke through this door.
This is from the police. When they hit it with whatever they hit it with.
Her door is among many in black and Latino communities where we found the vast majority of search warrants are executed by Chicago police.
Chicago police.
We really wanted to know how often wrong raids happen, but the police department, after a year of telling us they do track wrong raids, finally admitted they don't. In the end, our reporting forced them to turn over whatever records they do have, and they gave us this. It's a database of every search warrant executed from 2016 to 2019. There were a total of 6,800. After we mapped the data, we quickly learned it's not just about how often these warrants were executed, but where.
They used a tank, rammed the door.
Our mapping found the neighborhood with the most is Inglewood, where where Sharnia Phillips was wrongly raided in 2017.
I could have been killed.
Inglewood had 872 search warrants. Also in the top 5 neighborhoods are Austin with 668, North Lawndale 455, Garfield Park 442, and Humboldt Park with 376. Census data shows these neighborhoods are all nearly 90% or more Black and Latino. We found only a small percentage happen in white neighborhoods, and none listed for Edison Park, Printers Row, Wrigleyville, Museum Campus, and Magnificent Mile.
We the targets, Black people.
Demetrius Laban and his sister were also wrongly raided in 2017 in the North Lawndale neighborhood.
I was scared.
Sharon Lyons' neighborhood, back of the yards, ranks 7th for the most search warrants with 290.
Get out.
She says her son Julius, who has autism, started to run when he saw the guns and her on the floor.
My mom. On floor.
Were you afraid for them all?
Yeah. Scared.
Police then searched the apartment where no one had ever heard of anyone named Blondie and found nothing, no drugs at all. Our analysis of CPD's own data shows 72% of search warrants were for illegal drugs. So how often do police find drugs? Out of the 4,900 drug-related search warrants, they only confiscated drugs in 221 cases. That's less than 5% of the time.
Search warrant, Chicago Police!
Like here in 2019, during this wrong raid for drugs on the Archie family. All police found were 3 terrified children who they pointed guns at and ordered to the floor.
Please do not shoot me.
You're fine.
And during the most recent raid on the Lyons family,
Did they point the guns at you? They did?
Lily's uncle James couldn't believe they pointed a gun at her.
You're here in handcuffs, and you're on the ground, but you're thinking about your niece.
They went through with their guns out, and I just heard my niece start screaming. She was so helpless at the time. Like, none of us could have helped her.
Of course, we're going to make mistakes, but we can't keep making the same mistakes over and over without putting procedures and policies in place.
Newly appointed police superintendent David Brown wasn't in Chicago when all these raids happened, but is well aware of CBS 2's ongoing investigation.
Thank you so much for the story. I really believe that journalism has a role to play in making sure government does what it's supposed to do, and it's exposed when it doesn't do the job in the right ways.
He says these wrong raids have to stop, and if they do happen, they must be documented and tracked.
There's things that we can do that are best practices on the front end, like not just trusting a confidential informant's information without corroboration.
Which is why he says tracking them and holding officers accountable when they get it wrong is so important to protecting innocent families and kids.
So yes, tracking is something that I want to include, along with measures on the front end to ensure we check, double check, and triple check before we run a raid to ensure it's the right place.
Did they arrest anyone?
No.
And then there's this. The Lyons raid is what is called a negative search warrant, meaning nothing was recovered and no arrests were made. We examined those warrants and found the top dozen officers who conducted the most negative search warrants also have a combined 446 citizen complaints filed against them, something Lily's Uncle James had to file all the way back in February.
So he grabbed me and he forced me to the ground with his knee in my back also.
Alleging excessive force. And listen carefully now, how familiar it is what he says happened to him.
Until I saw the gun in my face and everything, and then he threw me down on the ground, put his foot all in my back and my neck. Almost killed me because I was kind of sick at the time and I could barely breathe.
He could barely breathe. An allegation he made months before what we all saw happen in Minneapolis to George Floyd.
If you don't do them right, they rescind whatever trust you've earned.
They wouldn't let you go to her?
No.
What did it do to you to see guns pointed at her?
It frightened me because anything could happen. A gun can go off in a matter of seconds.
To see and hear what keeps happening to these kids is just heartbreaking. CPD wouldn't comment on the raid at the Lyons home. There's an open investigation into that case by the Civilian Office of Police Accountability. The family's attorney, Al Hofeld Jr., plans to file a federal lawsuit in the morning. Dave Savini, CBS 2 Investigators.
And our 2-year investigation continues.